Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to our fantastic CDIM webinar. A brief reminder that today is early bird registration deadline for AIM week. We're looking forward to seeing as many people in person as possible. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lana Kasood, and then she will take it from there. Dr. Lana Kasood is going to be an associate professor of medical education and clinical sciences and the interim vice dean of educational affairs at Washington State University College of Medicine. She's a member of CDIM Council, and she is a generalist both in clinical and academic medicine. She shared she has had the privilege of being mentored, sponsored, and coached by a number of different individuals throughout her career, and she's thrilled to be here. And we are equally thrilled to have you and for this wonderful webinar that you and the panelists have put together for us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walsh, for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Lana Kasood. I'm really excited to be here with a group of panelists who I will say are fantastic and have been personal role models for me. So I'm really excited for them to share their stories of their professional careers with you all. I will also say that this is the first of many, I hope, series in mentorship that the CDIM Council will be having in the future. So we would absolutely welcome your feedback and input into future conversations, and would love for us to continue the discussion on our listserv in CDIM, APTIM, APM, and all of our other groups within AIM. So with that, I am going to share a little bit about our panelists today that you'll be hearing from. Again, this is a very abbreviated biography for each one of them, and my hope is that you'll learn more about them as we continue our talk today. So I'll start with Dr. Catherine Schaefer. She's attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill for her undergraduate studies and medical degree, went on to complete a fellowship in infectious diseases, is an associate professor at Wake Forest University School of Medicine in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She engages in clinical, educational, research activities, all of which have been supported by mentors, sponsors, coaches, advisors along the way. She serves as the clerkship director of the inpatient internal medicine clerkship and has a number of critical roles, both in the UME and GME setting. We also found out today that she is going to be joining the CDIM Council as one of our newest elected members. So congratulations to her. Moving on to Dr. Delaney Goulet. She is the Associate Program Director for the Washington State University College of Medicine Internal Medicine Residency Program in Everett, where she has a number of critical roles, including directing the Clinical Competency Committee, faculty portfolio coaching, and scholarship. She is an assistant professor at the Elsinus Floyd College of Medicine and also serves as the faculty lead for internal medicine with the UMNE program. She served on a number of national committees with SGIM and the Washington chapter for the ACB. CDIM and APTIM are next for her, I'm sure. Her clinical roles include working as a hospitalist as well as a primary care doctor in a complex patient care team. She's been lucky to have various coaches, mentors, and sponsors in her career. Dr. Shireen Salib is a professor of internal medicine and serves in a number of roles at the Dell Medical School at UT Austin. Those roles include Associate Chair of Faculty Development and the Co-Associate Chair of Education at the medical school. She also chairs the Undergraduate Medical Education Curriculum Committee. She also serves on CDIM Council. She has a number of peer-reviewed publications in medical education that have included mentorship and sponsorship. Additionally, due to her expertise in these spaces, she has been invited as a speaker at several national academic institutions and conferences. So with that, excited to move on and talk a little bit about sort of what is going to be the meat of our topic today, and then open it up to stories. So as any academic internist will say, we absolutely need learning objectives. these are the ones that we talked a little bit about. We want to talk a little bit about why we are here, why we're talking about the importance of mentorship and other supporting relationships, and what do those look like, not only in the context of trainees, but also our colleagues and our staff that we work with at administrators. And through the process of storytelling, we're hoping to talk about positive and negative experiences. And maybe this is a conversation we continue on. So this is going to be the high-level outline. We've completed introductions. I'll give a little bit of framing as far as definitions are concerned, and then I'd love for us to have a conversation with our panelists. So I'll admit I have a number of questions that I'm interested to hear from them, but I would much rather you all please put your questions in the chat window, and I'll try and moderate those questions. There may be certain questions that our panelists feel like they're not prepared to talk about, and I will leave it up to them to make that decision for us. But again, like I said, feel free to put in your questions in the chat window. So I'll start off with mentorship and why does it matter? This is a question that I've been asking myself as somebody who is mid-career in academic medicine. So mentorship is defined in a number of ways. I'm sure you've through your leadership studies, you've learned that. The one that I came across that's a more recent one is it's an intentional developmental relationship in which a more experienced, more knowledgeable person typically nurtures the professional and personal life of a less experienced, less knowledgeable person. Feels a little harsh when you sort of put it in those terms, but I think we'll talk a little bit about what that means in the context of being beneficial to mentees, mentors, and others. So lots of benefits for mentees, and this includes a significant impact on their personal development, academic career path, and research productivity, as well as hopefully reducing burnout and improving their career satisfaction. Lots of benefits to consider for mentors as well. It's not an exhaustive list, but some to consider are gaining a fresh perspective from a mentee, reinvigorating the field, whether it is in teaching, research, or other aspects of their work, as well as seeking potential collaborators through mentees, whether they are learners or peers. With the pandemic, I think all of us have appreciated the power of networking, especially when we were in situ and needed to be able to communicate and connect with colleagues across the country and across the world. And I think there's a really, really strong role for mentors to be able to facilitate that for mentees, but also the opposite. And then, of course, expanding leadership responsibilities and opportunities. And I'll put in a plug for our panelists to perhaps talk a little bit about how this was important for them. There are benefits to the organization, and I think this is an incredibly important piece to think about is mentorship is not just in the context of two individuals working together, right? It's the organization that also has the opportunity to retain those two faculty members or those trainees, and to also promote job satisfaction, to reduce burnout for their employees, and to nurture the field. As well as, I think, and this is incredibly important, especially as we'll talk a little bit about sponsorship, allyship, how we support underrepresented minorities, is to have a better or more effective organizational culture as well. And so there's a lot of opportunities there for shared and alignment with goals with the organization. So the question we always ask ourselves is it enough, right? Or so what? I mean, is that really changing or giving us the benefit that we hope it would? And I think I'll say this personally and also looking at the literature that's come up in the past decade is that it may not be sufficient for career advancement, especially, and career satisfaction for folks as much as we thought it did maybe 10, 20 years ago. And there are certain subgroups that may not have the maximum benefit. And I would perhaps put women and those who identify as women and underrepresented in medicine and academic medicine. And how can we think about those categories as being offered additional opportunities for professional growth and development, especially as we think about nurturing them as future leaders, academics, etc. So I like to think about this in terms of certain definitions, and the resources are provided, and the references are provided at the end of the presentation. But I'd like to start off by talking about sponsorship. And so, by a show of hands, would love to hear from you, see how many of you feel comfortable knowing what sponsorship means in the context of professional development. All right, grateful our panelists are aware, and others. How do you feel about that? All right, it's hard for me to see everyone's faces, but I'm assuming that perhaps this is something that we can talk a little more about today and for future sessions. So sponsorship can be defined as an active support by someone who's appropriately placed in a organization, so within the academic structure or even outside in the field, perhaps. And they have a significant influence on decision-making processes or structures. And that person, that sponsor, is advocating for, protecting, and fighting for the career advancement of an individual. So I look at it as somebody who is sort of your cheerleader, if you will, when you can or perhaps don't feel comfortable advocating for yourself for career advancement or for that opportunity that is just beyond the reach in your mind. Um, this person is talking about you behind your back in a positive way that is only pulling you up, if you will. Coaching. Coaching is I think this is something that perhaps we live our lives within the space, especially as we are working with a huge slew of diverse learners, whether those are MD students, residence fellows, faculty, staff, and our colleagues, other colleagues. So coaching is more sort of time limited as a relationship, and it is more focused on mastering specific skills. So think about, as an example, for me, public speaking sometimes feels a little hard. And so having a coach being able to give me that feedback on an ongoing basis is incredibly important for me to perhaps achieve deliberate mastery of that skill. That relationship, like I said, can be typically time limited, or as you all sort of engage with perhaps resident learners or medical students, those could be longitudinal, but that is for a finite time at the end of the day. And then once there is an achievement of a performance related goal, that's the end of the coaching relationship naturally, and perhaps there's future conversation there. Advising, similar to coaching, is specific to a certain sort of skill or task, and typically ends up being sort of a one-way relationship in the sense that you have your advisor providing advice to a person who may not have that particular knowledge and skills, and allows for there to be sort of more a unidirectional opportunity for the advisee to be able to gain more information, knowledge, etc. We're all in the throes of an upcoming exciting match week. And so I would say that for me as an advisor, I'm acutely aware of perhaps my impact or that I may or may not have on my students that are going into the match. And I think that feels like an important part of my professional identity. Um, I have come to like this table or sort of this graph in us thinking a little bit about the roles of mentorship, sponsorship, coaching, and advising in the context of sort of what does the conversation look like? Questions and answers, right? So mentorship and coaching as an example. The questions, it's more of a question-based relationship, if you will. So your mentor or coach can be sort of asking you questions about what do you think is an important next step in the context of learning how to feel comfortable about public speaking. And so that would help the coachee or the mentee to be able to sort of then respond that way. So there's more of a guided response there. Whereas sponsorship and advising is more of the answering questions or asking the questions in a rhetorical format, perhaps that will allow somebody to be able to reach those goals in that role. There's also sort of there's the externally driven and the internally driven sort of factor here as well, in which mentorship sponsorship sort of typically ends up being externally driven. So it can be more outward facing. So you have your mentor or sponsor sort of having you be presented as a professional, as an individual, to perhaps a colleague or to an organization for your professional growth. Whereas coaching and advising tends to be sort of a more intimate conversation between the two, in which you're sort of working on a task that is helping you to be internally motivated, et cetera, to be working towards. A note about allyship. I think even though this isn't necessarily in the same category as those four relationships, I think it's incredibly important when we think about professional development. And so allyship, as the Anti-Oppression Network defines it, is an active, consistent, and ongoing practice of unlearning and re-evaluating, in which a person in a position of privilege and power seeks to operate in solidarity with a targeted group. And practicing allyship is not linear or constant and does require ongoing self-reflection and learning as an ally. And I think a lot of you on this call practice this on a daily basis, and perhaps are also sort of thinking about how you can show up for your trainees, for your colleagues, today, tomorrow, and forever. So I'm going to stop there because I think that we have a lot of examples, perhaps, that we can glean from our panelists today, as far as their own professional journeys in the context of these differing relationships. So I'm going to stop my screen here. And as I said, we're a fantastic group of individuals. I think we have about 38 participants today. It may be hard for us to ask questions, but perhaps verbally, but I would encourage you, like I said, please, to ask those questions in the chat. So my first question to anyone is going to be, could you give us an example, please, of mentorship, and give us an example, perhaps from a time when you were a trainee? Catherine, go ahead.
I mean, the example that comes to mind is when I was an ID fellow at UVA. My mentor, Becca Dillingham, was, I mean, a real role model for a lot of us. And traditionally at UVA, when you start your fellowship, the first question is, what lab are you going to join? And I was not a lab person. And she really helped. She was mentor and sponsor for me, and advisor, and coach, but she went out on a limb to help guide me through learning how to do clinical research, and helped me create a new path that nobody else had done as a fellow at UVA, and was incredibly patient with me in teaching me the ins and outs of clinical research, particularly in an environment that was not necessarily welcoming of clinical research in that particular setting. Shared with me a lot of the lessons that she had learned over the course of her training, and then also became a mentor to me as a professional woman, and a mother, and a human, and so mentored me in many areas of my personal and professional life. And I always joke that I really need a bracelet that says, "What would Becca do?" Because she's sort of that angel on my shoulder at all times.
I love that story, Catherine. And I would say that the most effective mentors, I've had so many mentors that I'm grateful for, during my training years, during my time as a junior faculty member, and until now. And it's really been the people who've believed in me, even at times when I didn't believe in myself, at times when imposter syndrome or doubts came into my mind, particularly if I was taking on a new role. It was folks who believed in me and could sometimes see some potential that I couldn't see myself, and made that clear to me. And a lot of them served initially as a mentor, and then moved on to become a sponsor or a connector to connect me with others. And those have been the the most effective and memorable mentorship relationships for me during my journey.
And I can certainly relate to some of the topics that you each called out in your stories. I think two things that resonate with me is mentors often lead you in multiple areas of your professional life, whether it be work-life balance, clinical performance, professional identity formation or integration. And I think the person who stands out to me as one of my early mentors, a generalist at Brown, Heather Cassidy, she certainly entered kind of my educational journey as an attending on service with me and helped coach me, but then later on was able to help me reflect on a harder educational experience where maybe impact or intention and impact were different in a clinical space. And being able to step in that moment and relate to that situation, offer kind of insight, and also help me understand my own feelings around the process was incredibly transformative for me long-term. And then going forward as a junior attending was able to help me make some kind of career path decisions based on some of her experiences. And then later on as a dual physician family, help think about career in the context of work-life balance. So I'm very grateful for many different mentors, but appreciate that at different times, different mentors have helped in different areas of my personal life or professional career.
Thank you. And I also love that all three of you sort of called these relationships as differing over time. So it sounds like you had really strong professional relationships and your mentors ended up being sponsors, coaches, allies, et cetera. Right? So I'd love to hear from one of you perhaps about what an example of sponsorship might look like as perhaps somebody who was sponsored or somebody who you did sponsor.
I'm happy to start, Lonika, as I've progressed through my career and have thought about people who've opened doors for me as sponsors. I have committed to always partnering with another faculty member, particularly someone who may be early in their career, in any of the work that I do. So if I'm going to be presenting a workshop, I will think, well, who else can I engage in this as a form of sponsorship? Or I'm writing a paper, or I've been invited to do a presentation. Who else can I engage in this? So I've tried to commit to always thinking about who can I sponsor? And sometimes that mentorship and sponsorship circles overlap. Sometimes it's someone who is my mentee. Sometimes it isn't. So that's a form of, I've tried to become, as my career has unfolded, to become a lot more intentional about thinking, well, what am I doing? Who else can I engage in this? And to, as you mentioned in your presentation, mentioning their names in rooms where opportunities come up and saying their name in rooms of power where the ears of those in power are listening in.
Thank you. And we have a few questions in the chat. I want to just address a couple more examples from you all about those different relationships. And then I'd love for us to talk about those really, really important questions in the chat. Let's talk a little bit about moving to coaching. So Delaney, I'm going to call you out because you and I have had this conversation about coaching and perhaps what has been helpful for you perhaps in the context of working with trainees with that relationship, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lonika. I think, I gravitated towards medical education because of a background in athletics and athletics coaching. And I think having experienced many different coaches in my own background, it became apparent to me that, learners definitely mesh better with different personalities. And so when I'm approaching a situation where I think that I might be able to coach a learner, certainly paying attention to their responses and what personality traits might work well with their kind of behavior or personality, and not just trying to guess, but maybe actually asking them, like, if I were to be someone, like if the relationship feels right and it seems like there's some trust there and maybe there's some space to actually be someone who is able to give some constructive feedback over time, not only trying to guess what personality would work best with them, but actually opening that door to say, there are different hats I can wear in a coaching relationship. I am curious what coaching techniques have worked with you in the past. So just making that an actual conversation so that from the very beginning, there's a space for them to give me feedback if what I'm attempting with them is actually not working best. And then letting them know ahead of time that my hope is to be objective and reflect back to them what I'm seeing in their clinical work, if it's in a clinical space where I'll be doing the coaching, and that is just one point in time, and by no means are these summative judgments. So highlighting that, formatively as learners, I want to give them feedback, but that they are adult learners and can take or leave it. And that my goal is simply to help them develop their own trajectory through whatever skills we're working on, and act almost as a mirror for those skills. So that's in a very narrow clinical context. That is what has worked well for me. If it's in the realm of faculty development, maybe with one of my core faculty, often coaching looks more maybe examining some of the different areas where I think I might be able to offer some reflection in their performance, and then asking their permission to do direct observation, if that makes sense. And again, trying to create that very equal table to sit at, to have the open conversations back and forth about both where they want to grow, but also where I think I can actually offer skills or support for them, because I can't be, I'm not good at everything and don't expect them to be good at everything. So narrowing the focus of what we actually work on together, and not trying to be their everything in their career, but find kind of a narrow scope we can at least start with together.
And I think you're also touching on another relationship, right? Or sort of role modeling, Delaney, as you were talking about your faculty member. And so I think that's incredibly important for us to think about in the context of all of these relationships as an important facet that you may have as far as power is concerned in that relationship. Moving on to allyship, Catherine, you have been an incredible ally, I'll say, to myself and others as well. So talk a little bit about with us what that looks like, perhaps on a day-by-day basis.
I think probably the best example I can give is some of the work that I've done around LGBTQ health, and working closely with our students and colleagues who identify as members of the LGBTQ community or as allies. And I feel like it's become now, I don't have to think about it as much, because it has become just such an ingrained part of sort of how I see the world, is thinking, okay, how can we change the language of this case, for example, to be more inclusive? How can we create case scenarios where it's not a heterosexual partnership, and just normalize different sex and gender minority identities? How can I look at curricula through a lens of trying to be inclusive? And so I think those are ways in which I've tried to be an ally, but then also recognizing that I need to keep the doors open to the needs of the community to which I see myself as an ally, as well as feedback for when I misstep or say the wrong thing, which absolutely happens. And that's hard. It's a vulnerable place. I think as an ally, we are so well intended, but also as an ally, we're inherently not necessarily a part of that vulnerable group, and will make missteps unintentionally, and being open to learning from those is important and hard. But I also think just being vocal about being an ally is really important, that it can't be a subtle thing. It needs to be having a piece of flair on my badge, and making sure that I'm actively advocating for curricular changes to help address the needs of the vulnerable group that I'm trying to ally with. But I still have a lot of space to grow in my role as an ally, for sure.
Thank you. And I appreciate you taking the thread, not about sort of in the moment allyship, but also in the context of sort of breaking systems of oppression or power, and how do we systematically work on those aspects, right? And so appreciate that call out as well.
It is
Going on.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to say it is interesting, sort of in the ally role, but it also, I think, overlaps a bit with the coaching role is in the moment, especially in the clinical settings of those active bystander moments, where I think our allyship is really tested. And also an area where I'm certainly trying to grow, but I think that that's something as educators, coaches, mentors, and sponsors, that's a space where we could contribute a lot and grow a lot.
So need for personal vulnerability, but also having an open mind and growth mindset, I think is incredibly important. So thank you all. We have some fantastic questions, and so folks, please keep them coming in the chat. So we'll go to Kiran's question on, have you ever had to redirect a mentee to someone else that may be a better fit, and how do you do that without abandoning or hurting feelings?
So I'm happy to chat about that. I actually tell my mentees, whether they're assigned to me or whether they come to me and ask for mentorship, that I should not be their only mentor. Every mentee needs what some call a board of directors. They need a panel of mentors. So that makes it an easy segue to saying, absolutely, I want to support you in XYZ. You're also interested in growth in ABC space, and I have a great colleague who has expertise in that area. Let me connect you with them. I think a big part of mentorship is not just that one-on-one relationship with your mentee, but a big part of it is also serving as a connector and helping them put together this board of directors who will help them along their career journey. And that makes the conversation about our relationship as mentor-mentee much easier. And sometimes they may lean into our relationship a little more. Sometimes they may lean out, and that's totally fine and expected and normal. And I will make those expectations clear at the beginning that this is normal. I want you to have a whole group of mentors. I'll help you along that journey. And sometimes we will meet frequently, other times less so, but I make it essentially a safe space.
I mean, I think it's important too for us to acknowledge when, our own limits and places where maybe we aren't the right person, and also giving the mentee that opportunity, and by just being transparent and saying, listen, if what I'm doing is not helpful, you can tell me that, and that's okay. Or if these opportunities that I'm suggesting, or if this does not resonate with you, tell me. That's really important. And sometimes that means saying, I think this person would be able to help you more. I think this person would be a better fit for what you need.
Thank you. Were your mentors assigned, or how did you get your mentors assigned to you?
Yeah, when I reflect on my early career, I was assigned a mentor and in residency, and by definition did meet with that person, but the people who became the longer term mentors, those relationships occurred organically via exposure clinically to them, and like appreciating maybe their approach to teaching or listening, connecting, I think. And so the ones that have stuck, and that I think has been a kind of a organic relationship that then takes work on both sides. And I really appreciated the idea of leaning in and leaning out over time, depending on, the mentee's needs and the mentor's time.
Just a brief plug. I will say the only assigned mentor program that worked for me was through CDIM. My mentor through CDIM, Rini Abraham, was just like a match made in heaven. Every other mentorship relationship for me has been just like Delaney.
Fantastic.
Just sign up for mentorship and CDIM.
Thank you. And I think we'll have more programming around that, perhaps at the annual conference as well. So look forward to that. Should we talk a little bit about sort of in a parallel, right? And so Brian asked this question around sponsorship as well. So should we be actively seeking out, encouraging others to identify sponsors? Or I don't know if you felt like this, but I sometimes feel icky, like, Shireen, can you please talk about me for this awesome position? I think it's taken me about 5 years to figure that out. So how did you get over that? And what are your suggestions for those of us that struggle with advocating for yourselves?
I think it's a two-way thing. We need to teach our faculty that a rising tide lifts all ships, so to speak. So it is part of your responsibility to look out for your colleagues, especially faculty who are mid-career or advanced in their careers, to say part of your responsibility is to open doors and opportunities for your colleagues. And we should hold those senior faculty members accountable and say, not only what did you do this year, what did you do for others this year? And that should be part of their accountability. The other side of the coin is, how do we ask for sponsorship for ourselves? And I think it's building a muscle of self-promotion is probably not the best term here, but sharing our work. And there are lots of different avenues for sharing our work. And it's just making it part of the culture that it's okay to share our work. Hey, you know, Dr. Sood, I wanted to share with you that I've done XYZ, and I know you're interested in work in this space. So I wanted to share that with you, and perhaps we can collaborate on a future project. Or I know that you work with another faculty member who's interested in this. If you could connect us. And so just sharing that, perhaps sometimes tying it with a little ask at the end, but it's becoming more, I think, acceptable, and I'm seeing more and more people doing it. So it's a muscle that we train as with anything else, has been my experience.
I'm reminded also with this conversation with, you know, I think there's data around women will look at a position description, right? And I think until they are 100% qualified, they are less likely to apply for that position. Whereas perhaps for our male colleagues, that may be a much lower threshold, I think maybe 40% or so. And so sort of perhaps also not only having a sponsor, but a mentor being able to push you and say, hey, I know you don't feel fully prepared for this position, but take a chance on it and ask, or let me ask for you. Because I think if we capitalize on the social capital a lot of us have, perhaps in that role that we are in, especially as we continue to advance in our careers, it costs $0 or zero money, as my 5-year-old would say, right? In order for us to pull up our colleagues as we continue to sort of have professional growth and give back. So really love those comments, Shireen. Switching gears a little bit as we think about conflicts of interest in relationships, right? So we talked a lot about positive growth and positive relationships. And so it's a really interesting and important conversation that Jacqueline is asking you all to consider, is when you have differing roles, whether it's for faculty or trainees, I think it works well. So what if you're in a residency program and you're responsible for remediating a learner, and then you also are perhaps in that structure of mentoring or coaching them for a completely different need? How do you work with those differences, with those two different hats for that trainee or individual?
I can definitely take this one to start. So as an associate program director in a fairly small and new residency program, we are certainly facing this challenge right now. You know, we have 12 learners a year and we have about 10 core faculty. So between our mentor pool, assigned mentors, portfolio coaching roles that we've kind of instituted, our clinical competency committee, And then the natural kind of mentorship that happens between some learners and attendings, there is a ton of overlap. And so we've been actively trying to navigate this. I can think of a scenario that is exactly what's been described in the chat. And I would say for that specific scenario, we have gone to both the learner and the attending to ask, hey, you're this person's kind of longer term mentor via their, targeted skills development remediation. How does that feel to you to also be maybe an attending on service during this year when they're on this plan? And it was actually that the attending felt they couldn't play both roles. And our goal is to not have them need to play both roles. And so, despite having a small kind of core faculty group, I think we've realized we need to invest in faculty development to expand the pool of folks who can still give objective kind of performance dimension trained assessments of our learners so that we can separate the roles in these higher stakes scenarios where we don't want someone's long-term mentor to also have to be a judge in a given case on performance. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has experience with this.
I can perhaps just acknowledge that clear is kind, right? I mean, not acknowledge, just say, like to quote Brené Brown, until you have that clarity for yourself first and inside, it will be perhaps very confusing for the person in front of you. So going back to sort of setting clear expectations and Delaney, what you all shared is incredibly important. So learners also perhaps might look at us as good cop and bad cop at the same time, which for a variety of reasons, educational reasons, legal reasons, ethical reasons, is inappropriate. So I think whenever I have a question in my mind or a scenario in front of me, I like to think about, who am I showing up in this interaction today as? Am I showing up as this person's coach? Am I showing up as this person's faculty member or their mentor? And if that's not clear to me, then I will always then reach out to a colleague, a friendly colleague, and say, hey, what do you think I should be doing?
Monica, I'll just add to that as well. Not only which hat do I think I'm wearing today for this learner, but if I'm wearing that hat, is that the hat they actually see me wearing? Because for many of our learners with the hierarchy, if I'm the clinical competency committee chair, even if I'm on service with them and going to provide a one-off direct observation that is formative, they actually don't know how long I will carry that formative assessment in my mind when I approach the next clinical competency committee meeting. So despite me thinking in that moment, I'm safe, this is formative, this is not going to impact your whole career, sometimes it becomes apparent to me that they can't see that that's the hat I'm trying to wear in that moment. And their perspective is actually, in my mind, what matters more than what hat I think I'm wearing. So that's where I try to help make the decisions then for other people's learning plans, like who is the correct person for this role. And so going back to Jacqueline's question, it does depend on the learner a little bit and their confidence and maybe their desire to ask for feedback. Some people, are natural, like, I want to be coached. I don't care who it is. Give me the feedback. I want it. Some people are, oh gosh, I don't believe this person's feedback is accurate. I can only get feedback from somebody who's not also a CCC chair because otherwise they're inherently kind of biased and tied in. So trying to feel that out in your learners, I think, can be helpful. That said, I think we will make mistakes. And so being able to go back and say, hey, I made the wrong choice of who should maybe be involved in that assessment. And so let's move forward and we'll do better.
Love it. And you're bringing back the vulnerability and the openness, right, with your learner or your colleague. Let's talk a little bit about also when you're in a mentor-mentee relationship, but I would also think any of these, right, an advisory relationship or sponsoring, et cetera, relationship, things are not going well. Perhaps let's talk about a scenario that you all have that somebody's experienced as being on the mentor side and the other as being a mentee. What do you do then?
I think the first thing is to identify what I mean by that it's not going well, is it because there is a different perspective that's being brought to the table that's making me uncomfortable? And if so, I think that's not an issue, that's not a problem. Or is it that there, I don't feel that the mentee is thriving in this relationship? Or is it that there is a lack of mutual respect? Or is it that there is a lack of clarity of goals? Our goals are not aligned. So I think some things can be remedied and should be remedied, because a mentor-mentee relationship that's smooth sailing is rare, and it means that it's not stretching the relationship sufficiently. There should be a lot of safety within that relationship, but there should be some stretch also that feels a little uncomfortable in that relationship. So is it that stretch that's making me feel uncomfortable? And if so, why? And how can I remedy it? So finding the lesion first is the important thing. But then if it's something that cannot be remedied, it's just not a good fit, or this mentee really needs someone who works in a different space, then I think just an honest conversation about, let's revisit your goals, what you want out of this mentoring relationship. Let's see if we can align our goals or not. And then this can be a segue into talking about, well, perhaps let me connect you to someone else, or perhaps let's revisit XYZ. So I think it starts with figuring out where the lesion is, figuring out whether it's something that can be remedied or not, and figuring out whether it's just part of the normal stretch and a challenge of a good relationship, or if it should really be discontinued.
That's fantastic. Catherine or Delaney, do you want to talk a little bit about as a mentee, right? What do you do when things are not working out?
I mean, as a mentee, first of all, that I took so many notes from what Delaney and Shireen just said in their responses to those very difficult questions. So thank you. I appreciate benefiting from your wisdom. I mean, on the one hand, as a mentee, we could just do the ghosting thing where we just don't show up anymore. And I can't think honestly about a specific example, but I'm sure I've probably done that in the past with those assigned mentors that I did the bare minimum and then they really weren't fulfilling anything for me. And then I think honestly, that's a work in progress for me, because I'm still learning how to ask for what I need. I'm still trying to figure that out, to be quite honest. And so I think I'm getting better with mentors asking for what I need. And I think that is one of the responsibilities of a mentee. And ideally in the right mentee mentor relationship, there is safety, like Shireen was saying. And so we can ask for what we need, but I think there's also just some individual growth that has to happen, especially I think for women, to feel comfortable asking for what we need. Yeah.
I also feel like time is always an objective measure for all of us. So bringing it back to, I don't want to be wasting your time, and I don't have that much time, to always be like a metric by which you can open the door to how can we use this time more effectively, or is this a relationship worth using our time for, not in a bad way, but again, realigning to like, what are the goals here? And if you've kind of lost sight of what the goals of that relationship or communication are, maybe actually examining that with the mentor. Like, when we first started chatting regularly, it seemed like the majority of our conversations were around, my ability to set boundaries at work and not bring hard things home. But as you've helped me get the skills to do that, I've actually realized maybe I could also utilize you for this different skill set, maybe navigating my next career choice. Is that something that you could actually help me with? And so as Catherine said, that is up to the mentee to kind of direct that, unless the mentor sees that maybe things aren't seeming as fruitful and can open the door. Is there anything else you think you could utilize me for to work through with you? But I think time is one objective measure where if things are not feeling productive and you're not sure how else to approach the person, that it's not helpful, you can always use that as a meter stick to kind of realign by.
That's fantastic. And I think there's already a little bit of chatter in the chat box about any resources for having an initial conversation with your mentor or mentee and what that looks like. And perhaps that's a conversation we can come back to our mentorship series to bring back. Shireen, thank you for offering some suggestions from, I'm assuming, the University of Washington. And so if you have the link, awesome, please put that in, but we can certainly follow up on that as well. Let's talk a little bit about, before we sort of come to a close, let's talk about if you're in a department chair, division chair, and you're trying to develop a mentorship program, what might aspects of that look like as we think about this in a systematic way?
I'm happy to start that question response. I think a lot of it is, the answer is it depends. It depends on the structure of your department. In some departments, there are a lot of early career faculty and fewer mid-career and late career faculty, which makes a one-to-one mentorship structure difficult. So in an ideal situation, we could set up a one-on-one mentorship structure for everybody. But in reality, it's not always easy. So there are lots of creative ways out there to set up mentorship opportunities. Some of them is what's called peer mentorship circles, where you can have a mentorship circle with a lot of folks who are in similar stages of their career, and there is one or two more senior faculty members who can that can get together as a group, and then as needed, there can be one-on-one conversations. So that's one setup. And then the other approach is to have specific faculty members as the go-tos for, particular areas. So we have a mentor in research. We have a mentor in non-research scholarship. We have a mentorship for career pathways and promotions. We have a mentor for educational leadership. And then this way we divide up the workload. We make it less onerous for individuals. Now, that's not to say that you cannot have one-on-one relationships as well and assigned mentors, but I think trying to make sure that everybody has one assigned mentor can quickly fall apart. It works in some cases, but can quickly fall apart and become resource intensive. But I'd love to hear from others what others think.
Those of you who have successful mentorship programs at your institutions, feel free to, if you don't mind, put in certain facets of what has worked and perhaps not worked in the chat as well. And would love to have this conversation, like I said, continue on offline. Before we end, I want to ask each one of you, if you could please, what do you hope your future selves might think about, or what would you want to, let me rephrase that question, sorry. What would you hope your future self will consider when you are going to start supporting a colleague? We'll go Delaney, Catherine, Shireen.
So that's a great question. I think that as I continue to learn more about mentorship and start to grow into a role of even being able to be a sponsor for somebody else, that I actually name my intent to be a mentor or a sponsor to somebody who I'm trying to support earlier, because I think that gives them the opportunity to tell me what they actually need and what they could use in the relationship, which again, I think we've identified is sometimes very hard for folks because we don't know what to ask for and maybe we don't know what we need. But as we spend more time in the field and have folks, role model these positions for us, it really does inspire me to be that person to somebody else and to start the conversation early, but also maybe set boundaries or be able to help foster a conversation that is direct and open about leaning in and leaning out when it's necessary, and restarting work on a specific topic when time permits. So I think for my future self, I hope I can direct some of those, I can open those doors for colleagues who I'm attempting to mentor earlier, and foster some of those open communications that I think would help them develop and help me understand how to help them develop.
I think very similarly to what Delaney was saying, and related also to something that you said earlier, Delaney, is being more intentional about what hat, thinking about what hat I'm wearing in that relationship, and asking the person I'm meeting with, the colleague, the mentee, what hat would be most helpful for them. So again, what do they want? And then really signposting sponsorship. And so that they also will pay it forward someday. Now that once I recognized that concept of sponsorship and started to see it when people would do it for me, it also motivated me to do it for others. And so I'd like to try to be mindful of the hat I'm wearing, ask what hat they want me to wear, and then signpost the sponsorship.
I love both those answers, Delaney and Catherine. What I would say is it's all about how to empower my mentees, empowering them in the space they want to grow in, empowering them to know their potential and taking them there and beyond, and empowering them to become mentors as well. And as I work with them, teaching them how to pay it forward as well.
Love those answers. And I will say, I mean, we're coming to an end. I'm gonna let Kathy chime in, and I want to just express my gratitude to AIM, to our council, our staff, as well as our panelists, and all of you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for all of you for this wonderful webinar. There's links in the chat that Sheila Acosta has posted for the Alliance Mentorship Program, and also the link to directly register for AIM Week in April, and we'll send that out through the listserv as reminders for everyone too. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all. Bye.